Welcome back, Ultimate Weapons, it's the Night Sky Prince again. I think that romance or love stories have always been an important theme within JRPGs, especially Final Fantasy. Since Final Fantasy IV, which introduced mini-series staples, such as the active time battle system, but also the idea of a love story being at the center of the plot. This theme would continue to be presented in almost every single mainline entry after, to the point of it almost being an expected element of the story. So when the game, formerly known as Final Fantasy Vs. 13, teased an idea of a heroine who is both simultaneously in love with the protagonist and yet forced to fight him, it really raised a few eyebrows. With a look in her eyes that can only be described as regret, you could only wonder what would make these two be forced to fight. As the transition from Versus to 15 happened, we learned that this interaction, and in fact the heroine herself, no longer had a place in this newly written story, with the director Hajime Tabata saying that the original female lead, Stella Nox Fleuret, no longer had a logical place in the story, and rather than creating a Stella that didn't live up to our expectations, we were given a new character, Luna Freya Nox Fleuret, as our new love interest. So, how did her romance with Noctis turn out compared to the one we perceived with Stella? Well, honestly, it's not that good. In fact, as much as it honestly pains me to say this, it may have been one of the worst romances in any video game I've ever seen before. And trust me, that's honestly no understatement. Before I simply dive into criticizing the authenticity of Nox and Luna's relationship, I want to give you an idea of the type of love story in a video game I would consider pretty much close to perfect, and it's within the same series, Final Fantasy X's Tidus and Yuna. There's a few criteria in which I judge these types of love stories on. The first is, are they showing more than they're telling? Do we actually see the buildup? Is this leading us to somewhere? Do we see people who go from strangers to friends to being romantically involved? Or does the story just simply tell us that they like each other? The second is how congruent the chemistry is between the two characters. Is there a genuine sense of playfulness in their relationship? Are they able to connect with each other? The key factor here is being the dialogue and the character expressions. If you've ever been able to tell points in which characters begin to feel attraction for each other, and you've seen multiple scenes in the game where the attraction is obviously building, this probably means that they've established good chemistry in their writing. And the third criteria is that there is payoff for it all at the end. The delivery of what I call the confession point. This is where it goes more from being just a speculative matter and something that's canon to the story. Most typically, this is where characters become direct in their feelings. And provided it's not a one-sided love story, it's reciprocated. On all three of these accounts, I believe that Final Fantasy X tells an absolutely exemplary romance and a believable story between Tidus and Yuna. And conversely, Final Fantasy XV seems to violate this in every single aspect. Let's start with the first criteria, showing more than telling. Final Fantasy XV attempts to tell a story of a long-distance relationship. These two characters met when they were children. The method in which they communicate is literally a magic dog who carries a notebook. They let the player choose what they want to write in the notebook, rather than having anything pre-written. This sounds cool in a way, to let you interact with your on-screen girlfriend, until you realize that no matter what you put in this book, it doesn't actually affect Luna Freya's response, so you aren't steering the course of conversation. You don't feel like you win her affection in any way. Also, it happens pretty far and few between in the story. Aside from that, the characters only meet twice in person. Once as children, when Noctis went to Tenebrae to seek healing for his injury, and the other time during the fight with Leviathan. The game wants you to believe that this one time, meeting as children was enough for them to have romantic feelings toward each other. Though with Luna Freya being 4 years older than Noctis, making her 12 at the time, and making him just 8 years old in this scene, it actually comes off as that's just his big sister. In fact, if you didn't know any better and you just showed someone this and told him that was his big sister reading him a cool fairy tale book, they would much likely believe that over these two are lovers. And it's not like you see them actually bonding over anything or establishing any sort of connection between each other. The connection that they do have, being the king and the oracle, are duties that they're forced into anyways. And it doesn't seem like there's any other explicit commonalities that the two have. This becomes very apparent as every ounce of dialogue that Luna ever has to say to Noctis is something about fulfilling her duty as Oracle, or him fulfilling his duty as king. So how do you know these two love each other? Well, they told you that they do. And the context of the story doesn't even give you much room to imagine that they are in love. To the contrary with Final Fantasy X, nearly every second of Tidus and Yuna's relationship is shown on screen, for both their good times and their bad. You see when they meet, you see them when they flirt, you see them when they kiss, and you see them grow into a part of each other's lives. Over the course of 40 or so hours, you see Tidus and Yuna's feelings evolving. Take the scene where Tidus has a dream about being romantically involved with Riku and Yuna, and unable to decide which one he likes more. To which his father, Jecht, comes and reminds him that he's the one cooking with the sauce, and all you have is ketchup. This scene is absolutely vital, as it shows you what Tidus is feeling at that point. He is attracted to two women that he's recently met, but the insecurities created by the relationship with his father leave him quite stifled. They highlight this by having Jecht say, "You with a girl? You can't even catch a ball." They communicate this a great deal with just a simple, funny, and still iconic dream sequence. This makes the payoff so much greater when you see Tidus grow into a man of his own and confidently direct his affections toward Yuna. The second criteria is of course the chemistry. With Noctis and Luna, they don't have much in the way of what you would call chemistry. In fact, they don't have much of what you would even call dialogue. While they're living adults, Noctis and Luna don't share a single line of dialogue with each other throughout the entire course of Final Fantasy XV. And that includes the entirety of 15 universe. Even if they were to romanticize to the fullest what they went through as children, they're adults here, 12 years later. So much happens in 1 year in a person's life that changes them, much less an entire decade, and then 2 years on top. From all the dialogue that we see of them as children anyways, it has nothing to do with them getting to know each other or building a special bond. It's almost exclusively how he's the chosen king and needs to fulfill his duty. Honestly, the two end up feeling more like co-workers than they do romantic interests. The two never even once have a conversation or hear each other's voice in the entire span of this time. The closest Noctis even comes to having dialogue with her is listening to her speech in Altissia, that or her praying over his unconscious body in the Leviathan fight. Then we have Tidus and Yuna, with something brilliant like the laughing scene. This scene is oftentimes mocked and misunderstood. It sees Tidus and Yuna laughing as though they've completely lost their mind, but rather this scene goes much deeper and shows a bonding experience between the two. It starts with Yuna showing Tidus that she's finally able to whistle, just as Tidus taught her, which already establishes a sense of bond. Then the scene shifts with Yuna expressing a sense of relation to Tidus. Tidus and Yuna have both lived lives under the pressures of having famous, successful fathers who are greatly idolized, and they're both expected to become their successor. She connects with him on this level and begins to show him a way in which she's managed to cope with this stress by laughing and smiling, and that you should do it even if it's forced. This in turn makes Tidus actually laugh in a genuine sense, ultimately demonstrating chemistry, furthering their bond, and creating a greater sense of investment in their relationship. Then we have the last major criteria, and that is the confession point. The point in which two parties decide in some way to confront each other about the mounting attraction and emotional tension. In Final Fantasy XV, there really isn't one. In fact, Luna and Noctis are only in a relationship because Arden thought it'd be really cool if he did that for no explicit reason, other than it made the peace treaty more believable if he did. At which point, you have to ask why they both stayed in the arrangement. Of course, not all arranged marriages are necessarily bad. In fact, in many cultures this is the norm and they can end quite well. In the context of this story, it would have been fine if they played it off as two people in an arranged marriage and they knew what sort of situation they were being put in. But as they got to know each other, they did develop a deep bond and they did fall in love, despite not necessarily choosing each other from the start. But this isn't the case in Final Fantasy XV, and the closest thing that we have to something like this is the ending scene, where Noctis and Luna are shown married to each other in the afterlife. In itself, this is actually a beautiful scene, and the fact that you get to choose what photo you bring to your bride from your long journey is a wonderful touch. But without a powerful context behind it, this scene doesn't ring quite as well as its wedding bells do. The closest alternative to this scene is a scene that was extended at a later point with a patch update, where Noctis finally breaks down and begins crying. Ray Chase does a phenomenal job at voice acting this scene. In fact, he does so well that it's not until a long time after that I realize he's crying over someone that he basically didn't even know. In fact, because you barely get to know Luna throughout the course of the game, you're not even sad that Luna died or that Luna and Noctis can't be together. You're just sad that you have to see Noctis hurting like that. Final Fantasy X here differs greatly. Instead of just having one confession point, Final Fantasy X has multiple ones. Though I think the most notable one for most of us is the kissing scene. Of course, it's the build-up that comes before this scene that makes it so crucial. Tidus telling Yuna essentially to reject her religious duties and come with her to his Xanarkand. Yuna here is unable to imagine herself being free of her duties, knowing her impending fate when she stops Sin. She can't just abandon all the people who have led her to this point, who want her to defeat Sin so they can experience the calm. She begins to cry and Tidus stops all of that with a kiss. Now, it's oftentimes speculated that this scene was implying that a lot more than just a kiss went down here, and them floating off maybe suggesting that Tidus mastered the Jack shot after all. And I don't disagree, but there's more than that to this scene. It's symbolizing the love confession of the two characters and its mutual positive reception. So when the curtain begins to close and Yuna says that last "I love you," Tidus, for what she believes is the last time she'll ever see him, it hits you really hard. While it's clear to see at this point where Square Enix's Business Division 2 messed up with regards to Noctis and Lunafreya's relationship, there's also quite a number of things that they could have done to the opposite effect. Starting with cell phones. They have them in this universe. And not only do they have them, there's actual concept art from the transition from Stella to Lunafreya, which actually depicts her on the phone with Noctis. So it's not like the idea hadn't occurred to anyone on the team. So then why did they not use them? If both a long distance relationship and a modern world was something they were really trying to depict, they should have depicted it as long distance relationships are in the modern world. And one of the most primary ways in which those relationships are maintained is through calling and texting. I want you to imagine how this could have greatly improved the authenticity of the relationship. Imagine late nights at camp. Every so often, Lunafreya would call you and talk to you. She could even tell you about stuff going on in her daily life, or even fill you in about things in the world or the political climate. This would allow them to build connection and chemistry in a very genuine way. These don't have to be long chats. In fact, keep them short, but make them highly frequent, just to convey the sense that they're getting to know each other and are very excited to meet each other after the long time gap. And you know what? Since it is a smartphone, allow Luna to send you text messages, not unlike how you can get text messages in Persona 5. Take that a step further and allow her to even send you pictures or selfies. Then imagine just days before Noctis getting on the boat to travel to Altissia. He notices that Lunafreya hasn't called him or replied to him in days. He begins to panic and worry that something bad might have happened to her. This would have made all the scenes before, during, and after the Leviathan fight have so much more payoff to them. Or, you know, they could have taken the time and resources that they had to make you go on a pseudo date with your best friend's 15-year-old sister and instead let you have a date with Lunafreya. But I guess that's just too much to ask. So Ultima Weapons, I want to know, does this assessment align with how you perceive these two games? Or do you actually disagree and think Noctis and Luna's relationship was authentic? Did it actually resonate with you? Subscribe, click the bell icon, and let me know in the comments below. And if you really love JRPGs, be sure to check out our Facebook group, Ultima, Square Enix plus JRPGs, the only place where we won't make you stay away from the summoner. Link in the description below.